I will call the order the June 22nd, 2020 meeting of the Waynesboro City Council. Folks that may like to participate this evening in a public hearing or during the citizen comment period, you may do so by dialing in at the appropriate time on the agenda, which is available online. And so that call-in number, and I'll repeat that when we get to the agenda, is call-in is 844-844-9200. And when prompted, you'll enter the access code 398145 and then the pound key. You'll hear Q&A session has started and press *6. And then you'll be added to the queue at that point. You'll want to press 1 to be added to the queue. So I hope you can join us. Item number 2 is the adoption of the meeting agenda with a note that we are going to add a converting 5 to 5A, and then 5B would be the second a consideration of a increase into the appropriation for the CARES Act grant program, the Renaissance Fund. So that is the agenda for this evening for council's consideration. Did I get that right, Mike? Okay. So with that, we will, is there a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Great, thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you, Bobby. Is any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Hey, Mayor.
Yep.
Have we lost Sam?
Yeah, where is he?
We did. He was there a second ago.
Sam.
See if he's in. Is he in the queue there, Jim?
Here he comes back.
Okay. All right. So we had a motion by Ms. McCutcheon, second by Mr. Henderson. No discussion? All those in favor of the meeting agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. Item 3 is to consider of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I'll make that motion.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Is there a second? Great. Thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4 are matters from council members. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share this evening?
I do, but if anybody else have something first, I do have something I need to share.
Okay. I would just, yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to, yeah, go right ahead, Sam.
Because of the pandemic, I had stopped doing my constituent meetings, but I'm going to start those up again the first Tuesday in July, and that'll be the 7th of July. And I'm going to move it over to the Constitution Park Pavilion. That way we can bring your own coffee and social distance over there. And I'm going to move the time to 8:30. So hopefully it's a little cooler. So 8:30 at the Constitution Park Pavilion, open constituent forum, whatever people want to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
go ahead, Ms. McCutcheon.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I want to take only a few minutes, and you may say, where is she going? Just bear with me, okay? I'm going to take you back to 1987 for a moment. But if you indulge me and be patient, you'll see why. As a member of the Special Project Committee, with an objective to lead and complete the development of street infrastructures in the Port Republic Road area, prior to it being a designated historic district, there were 3 assurances that we were agreed upon, and they were water, sewer, and sidewalks, at which were completed, but the sidewalks. Although it has been over 25 years, I want to express my thanks to this council and acknowledge the completion, or not completion, but renovation of the sidewalks being done currently. A special thanks to Mr. Shaw for all of his effort to ensure that Port Republic Road became a historic district. Of course, he did this diligently with his staff and the council. However, in 2013, the Pkwy Group was established, and then in 2014, we became a 501(c) organization. We work closely with the city to get repairs necessary at the Port Republic Road Railroad crossing. And at the completion of that project, we were then able to remove the small separation of Mill Street from the railroad crossing to Broad Street. And effective July 1, the GPS navigation will update, and any driver that have to put in an address to find Port Republic Road will do so now with no problem. Several years ago, the Pkwy group brought the issue up about the Florence Avenue Bridge potentially closing because of the condition that it was in. This group pointed out several concerns, majorly about safety for that particular area. One entrance in and one entrance out, unless you go all the way around the Bridge Street somewhere trying to get in. Emergency vehicles crossing at that location, the trains coming across, Brockton emergencies. It was too much heavy traffic on a small, narrow street. So as I stand here this evening as a councilwoman, it gives me great pleasure to announce that this project is completed. And I took a drive over it on June 16th and was very pleased. So I wish to thank the council, all of you, for all of your hard work and effort, for putting up with me and the rest of our Pkwy group for restoring Florence Avenue Bridge and doing what was needed for a period of time. Sometimes it does take a long time to get something done, but I can always remember this of Mr. J.B. Young. He said, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And I want to thank you this evening.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. McCutcheon. Appreciate it very much. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add? First of all, I'll definitely echo the Florence Avenue Bridge. It's exciting to have that open, and our sincere thanks to staff for their perseverance getting through. There's no such thing as free money, so it's really
Right.
to be able to work through those federal and state guidelines, and appreciate staff's diligence to see that difficult project through.
Thank you.
Did want to mention a couple of other things just for folks to be aware of. Dr. Hofstadter and I attended a Juneteenth celebration at Constitution Park on Friday evening. It was well attended. The rain held off, and it was really nice event. And I look forward to next year's and celebrating that. The other thing that I want to mention, we had a appreciation to Vice Mayor Henderson and Ms. McCutcheon and Erica Smith from our Waynesboro School Board, and of course, and Mr. Hamp and Lumos Networks for the launch today at Constitution Park underneath that pavilion that you'll see Dr. Hofstadter at next week, or in a couple of weeks rather, is the launch of a fiber hotspot for Lumos. It's an open access available to the public, to our school children, the unemployed or underemployed, or those that just need high-speed internet access. That is available at no charge from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week for a 2-hour max, and hope that the community really benefits this and finds value in it. And I just want to echo all the thanks that we want to bestow on our friends at Lumos Networks for helping us out with this much needed project. So thanks to them. All right, item 5A, we'll call that 5A, is an appropriation ordinance for the CARES Act grant program. It's the second consideration of an ordinance appropriating funds from the CARES Act in the amount of $100,000 to the general fund for economic development business relief grant program. And again, understanding that we're looking to move that to the effective date through June 30th of 2021, but I'll call Mr. Hamp to better explain it than I, and offer any questions. So Mr. Hamp.
Thank you, Mayor Short, members of the council. Good evening. I will endeavor to provide introduction and explanation for the two actions requested this evening. The amendment and final adoption of the ordinance introduced at the previous meeting appropriating $100,000. And then a note concerning the new item, which will be an appropriation ordinance that ultimately increases the total appropriation by way of a separate appropriation from $100,000 to $50,000. For general context, the applications received for the program total $147,000. The Economic Development Authority received 18 applicants. or 18 applications. 7 of those 18 were for the maximum amount of $10,000. 8 of the applications were for made request for $5,000 to $10,000, and 3 applications made requests for less than $5,000. The program received significant coverage in the local media and through Mr. Hitchen's efforts to market the program, Mr. Hitchen and his staff. And I think we would regard the initial participation as healthy. As staff has continued to evaluate the administration of the program, it becomes apparent to us that the evidence necessary to satisfy the anticipated federal requirements for audit and verification will be rigorous. And for that reason, it's our recommendation that the council push the effective date of this ordinance, or the initial ordinance, to the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021. We feel like that given some of the rigor of that documentation, the inability to complete it successfully would actually delay putting the money in the hands of the applicants beyond what we had originally contemplated. So it's our recommendation that we amend that ordinance and make it effective for the fiscal year, or the ensuing fiscal year. And I have specific language that I'll read to accomplish that. The second 5 item this evening will be the, if council sees fit, the introduction of a separate appropriation ordinance that would furnish the additional $50,000 to cover the value of the applications that exceed the initial appropriation of $100,000. That's not to say or create an expectation that that money would be dispersed. The committee that evaluates the applications have not completed the screening for eligibility or qualification, but it certainly would position the organization to distribute those funds if they are awarded in a timely and efficient manner. And so the second item that council was asked to consider is introducing that identical ordinance appropriating the additional $50,000. So unless there are questions, I'll give you the language, or I'll furnish the language for the amendment. I might also observe that in Greg's estimation, Mr. Hitchen's estimation, the applications, those 15 applications that I referenced, represent a fair sampling of downtown businesses, businesses from the Millet South River complex, and small businesses generally across the community. So we feel we have a positive impression about the response and sampling that we got for applicants in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. Any questions for Mr. Hamp before we provided the amended language? Okay, Mike, if you wouldn't mind reading that.
Sure, be glad to. I propose an amendment and move that this ordinance be revised to appropriate funds for the 2021 fiscal year, and that the ordinance be effective July 1st, 2020, so that the first paragraph states, be it ordained by the council of the city of Waynesboro, Virginia, that the following sums of money are hereby appropriated as herein specified for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021, the fiscal year, and that the budget for the fiscal year is hereby amended to reflect the below listed appropriations.
All right, so we have that amended language for council's consideration. Is there a motion to adopt that that amendment?
So we'll move.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so I've done the amendment. Should I go through the second consideration now with the amendment? Melissa?
Yes, this is the second reading vote.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to read. I thought I read it right, so I appreciate it. So with that, so we have an amendment and our second consideration reflecting that amendment. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Great. Thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. Is there a second?
I think you said it.
Second.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Any questions? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, now set 5B would be the consideration of the additional appropriation of $50,000 to carry forward for the committee's consideration to bring that available grant fund ceiling to $150,000. So is there a motion? Is that, am I getting in my head nods? Okay. So is there a motion to amend the ordinance to reflect that additional figure of $50,000?
I'm
Yep.
sorry, Mayor, it's not a motion to amend. This is a new motion for an additional $50,000, and this would be the first reading of the $50,000.
Okay. So we'll bring this forward to at our next meeting for the second consideration.
Correct. We need a motion to introduce it at this point, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I will make that motion.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. McCutcheon. So we will consider this at our next meeting for that additional appropriation of $50,000. All right. All right, head nods. All right, okay, looks like we're good to go. Thank y'all. All right, item 6 is to hold a public hearing to receive comment on community needs as related to the CDBG annual action plan for use of federal fiscal year 2020 entitlement funds. Mr. Jude.
Thank you, Mayor. Many of you have seen this presentation or a version of it before. But just in case you haven't, and for the benefit of the public, that if anyone would like to comment, we'll give it again. An explanation of the Community Development Block Grant entitlement funds that we get. The Community Development Block Grant Program is a federal program that designates money to help with redevelopment projects, especially in low-income areas of cities that might not be able to afford to reinvest in them themselves. Since it has several different iterations, there's a competitive version of it that all cities can participate in, where you do a lot of, a years-long planning grant, and then you put together a plan, and then you apply for a significant chunk of money. And the city engaged in that competitive process back in the 2000s. But since 2014 or 2013, the city has been an entitlement community, which means that our poverty rate is above a certain threshold to where we're entitled to receive a set allocation of those funds every year. So it's a smaller amount, but it's guaranteed. We don't have to compete for it every year. And it works out to be about the same as what we had gotten competing very successfully before. In this case, we're required every year to hold a public hearing, like the one that we'll be holding today, discussing that is an opportunity for people to bring up ideas of what they would like to spend that money on, or even if not specific ideas, just general thoughts on how the program is being used. I'll explain a little bit about how we've used it in the past. And we're an entitlement community, which provides us with an annual grant on a formula basis. The goal of the CDBG program is to develop viable communities, to provide decent housing and a suitable living environment, expanded economic opportunities, especially for low and moderate income persons. So often you're talking about urban areas that may have been wealthier when they were first constructed, and now they're in a situation where the property tax or the income tax revenue being gained by those cities isn't sufficient to reinvest in those areas at the level that we'd like to see. And that's a problem for all of us in the community, because those folks are members of our community, and it's important for us to keep up all of our neighborhoods at that standard and provide that. So CDBG is a way to give us a small pot of money to do that. It allows projects to be taken on that would often be done with private investment in a newer or wealthier area. We've occasionally had folks point out in meetings the distinction, say that, well, this low income area looks like this, or why does this higher income area look like this? And it's not because of things that the city is doing. The city generally doesn't build infrastructure, we just maintain it. And so often what you're seeing in areas that are more recently developed or that have a stronger economic engine is that you're seeing a lot of private investment, and CDBG is meant to try to take the place of some of that. oftentimes when you have a slower economic engine, you also have less redevelopment happening. And so it's harder to partner with developers. If we have an area that's redeveloping, then we expect new site plans so we can get new sidewalks, new road improvements and new sewer upgrades. But we can't get that if no one's building anything new within a neighborhood, or if the costs to do that prohibit things from being built in neighborhoods. CDBG has several national objectives, which come down to us from HUD. First of all, benefiting low and moderate income persons. Secondly, aiding in the prevention and elimination of slums and blight. Thirdly, meeting needs that have a particular urgency in these areas. And it needs to be targeted at places that line up, that have a low to moderate income as defined by their census. Now, this is one of those areas of sort of bureaucratic irrationality to a certain extent, because our census boundaries don't always line up with our real city neighborhoods. So if you see here on the map, in red are the census tracts in Waynesboro that have more than 50% LMI population, so where we can legally spend the CDBG money. And in yellow is where they can't be spent. Now, as you can see, those lines don't all match up to where the exact neighborhoods are. For instance, the town center is included here. That's because it's part of the census tract that stretches all the way up to the northern part of the city here. There are steps to prove to HUD that an area should also be included. And they also audit us to see that, we're not getting away with spending money in a nicer area just because it falls within the census tract. But generally, these are the areas where the money can be spent. There are a number of things that CDBG funds can be used for. They can be used for the construction of public facilities and improvements, such as water and sewer facilities, streets, neighborhood centers, the conversion of school buildings for eligible purposes, public services within certain limits. You don't generally want to spend too much on sort of repetitive services. They're more focused on infrastructure, but you can, in certain cases, activities that are relating to energy conservation and renewable energy resources, relocation and demolitions. We've done some of this in the past. Rehab of residential and non-residential structures, and the provision of assistance to profit-motivated businesses to carry on economic development and job creation or retention activities. Things that we cannot use CDBG funds for, cannot use them for operations and maintenance. So anything that would normally be funded by our budget, paying for the typical salary of crew workers or maintenance of anything that already exists, has to be new items, new investments. Secondly is projects located in or primarily benefiting higher income areas. So even if something is located in a low income area, if the project in HUD's estimation is the kind of thing that really is meant to benefit a higher income population, then that's not an eligible expense. Buildings for government use are not eligible. Purchase of equipment is not eligible. You can't buy trucks or anything like that. New housing construction is not eligible. We have to produce a consolidated plan every 5 years in order to continue getting the CDBG entitlement money. And in that consolidated plan, there are a number of specific goals to Waynesboro. I'll just read off a few of them. So sorry for all the words on the slides. But the first goal is to provide a decent housing stock by preserving the affordable housing stock, increasing the availability of affordable housing, reducing discriminatory barriers, increasing the supply of supportive housing for those with special needs, and transitioning homeless families into housing. Second is to provide a suitable living environment through safer, more livable neighborhoods, greater integration of low and moderate income residents throughout the city, increased housing opportunities, and reinvestment in deteriorating neighborhoods. And third is to expand economic opportunities through more jobs paying self-sufficient wages, homeownership opportunities, development activities that promote long-term community viability, and the empowerment of low and moderate income persons to achieve self-sufficiency. Now, those are a lot of very lofty goals that certainly exceed the actual amount of money that is involved in the CDBG grant. The amount that we get tends to be somewhere under $200,000 every year, which is a lot of money in some cases, but in terms of public infrastructure projects, as you all are aware, that's not a lot of money. So we have to go through a process of trying to select projects every year. Our total fiscal year 20 grant, federal fiscal year 20, is $194,000. This is supplemented by an additional $114,000 this year from the CARES Act that was targeted at coronavirus relief and recovery. So we're asking to roll that into our fiscal year 20 grant. Now, the project is one of the most labor-intensive grants to administer, and thus a maximum of 20% can go towards personnel and administrative costs. And this is for a host of reasons because of the close oversight that HUD maintains over the program to ensure that it's meeting the program's goals, but also because of all the things like Davis-Bacon Wage Act, ADA, historic preservation, small, all those types of laws that that ensure that funds are spent in a way that are in line with the federal government's objectives. So we contract with the Waynesboro Redevelopment and Housing Authority to administer the grant and pay them that 20% to do so. So that leaves us within about $160,000 generally in a year with which to operate. Of that money, a max of 30%, or about $45,000 a year, can go to projects in commercial areas that are designated for slums and blight. Downtown is our currently designated slums and blight area. And so we've used that annual appropriation to do a number of things. The most recent project, I don't know if you've noticed, but in the Market Street parking lot next to the new ABC store near Kroger, there have been a number of tree islands put in and some new street lights, and it was repaved. And so that's a recent project. Also, you notice on Bruce Alley, next to where where Benny's Pizza is, there were some fixes that happened to the asphalt there, and some stamped asphalt was put in. That area was beautified recently. So we've done a lot of stuff downtown with that money. The other 70% has to be spent in residential areas that have that greater than 50% low to moderate income population. So what kinds of things have we done in the past? Downtown, we've done new sidewalks on Arch Avenue with the CDBG money. We did a number of facade grants for downtown businesses, and the CDBG program was what initially helped our facade grant program get started. We've done rehabs for homeowners that are unable to keep up their properties. In recent years, we've shied away from doing rehab just because it ends up being a very costly and often short-term fix. So unless you're doing really targeted rehab programs, what you end up doing is kind of spending your entire allocation in a year fixing up one house that, if you don't have a good contractor, good oversight in place, in 10 or 20 years, it can be in the same condition. So, but we have done some of that in the past. We've done a lot of utility improvements, a lot of water system improvements in Port Republic recently, and water pressure fixes in Basic City. This past year, we discussed trying to focus on the Port Republic road neighborhood, and as part of that, there were improvements to Riverview Cemetery. Some of those have been delayed due to ownership issues around the cemetery. It turns out that the city doesn't actually own much of the cemetery, and you can't spend CDBG money on privately owned property or privately owned cemetery property. So we're working that out. But a few other things are moving forward there, including the Port Republic Road Neighborhood Plan, which will be funded through this money. And Ms. McCutcheon was on, and Mr. Shaw were both on an RFP selection committee that selected an engineering consultant, or a planning consultant, to help us with that. That project has also sort of been delayed because it was supposed to be a public, community outreach project, and we don't want to endanger anyone during the pandemic. But once it's safe to do so, we'll move forward with that. We're required to put together a citizen participation plan with HUD every year that provides citizens with access to local meetings, information, and records, public hearings at all stages of the community development program, and timely written answers to written complaints and grievances. So it's not that people are voting on what to spend the money on. The city council is in charge of it, the city is, but there needs to be opportunities at every stretch, including tonight, for people who have opinions about how we're spending that money to be able to voice them to the council. As far as where the future of the program is headed, here's the fish crosswalk on Arch. It's another thing that was put in with some CDBG money. But we've tried to move towards a targeted approach by thinking about what projects really make an impact on the neighborhood. We're trying to multiply and leverage our money. We hope by making an investment in a visible public improvement, the private property owners will also feel positively about their neighborhood and be incentivized to care for their properties as well. So we're trying to do things that are visible. We've tried to concentrate on specific neighborhoods in the last 2 fiscal years, trying to do a number of projects in a small area and a few rather than sort of spreading the money out. I would say there's mixed success with that. I think it's a good approach that we hope to continue. But also, if you're dealing with a smaller area, sometimes there's difficulty in getting shovel-ready projects put together. When we were sort of doing piecemeal projects around the city before, you could take on projects that were ready to go and were sort of obvious things that could be done quickly and efficiently. So when you're focusing on a smaller area, you're having to come up with more ideas, and things aren't always really ready to move forward. So it slowed the project, it slowed progress down a little bit. The other major thing with the future of the program is the impending retirement of Tom Carlson at the WRHA, who has been administering the program for the city in previous years, which means we'll need to get someone trained and be spending a lot of staff time to administer this project in the future. And we discussed some possible solutions for that, including contracting with the PDC or trying to get some other kind of go in with another locality, because like I said, it is a serious burden to administer, and it takes quite a bit of training to do so. We're also looking at what the future of our investment in downtown is. In many ways, we've picked a lot of the low-hanging fruit there in terms of kind of simple aesthetic fixes. If you look around at our downtown, most of the public infrastructure is in fairly good shape. We have great, I think, sidewalks and landscaping improvements and things like that, in terms of things that would be inexpensive to install. But we have still barriers in terms of very expensive public infrastructure problems that sort of exceed the CDBG program's costs, and in private properties that we struggle with. And so we've just had a lot of discussions lately about what's the best way to spend this money downtown in the future. And we're certainly looking for input from that as well. Are there any questions on the program before we go to a public hearing about it?
Any questions, Mr. Juday?
Mr. Juday, I do have a question. We talked about some of the difficulties, both organizationally, but then also due to the pandemic this year. What is the time frame for expenditure on some of the funding from fiscal year 20? And is that something that we need to be speeding up our processes to utilize, or what?
I've not heard from Mr. Carlson that we have any kind of impending crisis there. I believe you have 2 or 3 years to spend the money from each year's appropriation. So he's been able to roll it forward so far. If the problems that we've had with some of these projects stretch out for a long time, then it could become an issue. And obviously with Mr. Carlson retiring, we'll need to make sure that we have a plan in place to smooth that transition, so that if we get into a rough transition there, that could cause us problems. But
Okay.
we've been discussing that and are aware of the issue, and we'll try to make sure that the funds all get expended.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, any other questions? All right, thanks, Luke. So not hearing any, I will hereby open up the public hearing. I'll look to staff to see if there are callers on the line for this topic.
Q&A session has started.
Hello?
Mr. Mayor, it looks like we have one caller on the line who's not coming into the question and answer. So if the caller is calling about the public hearing on community development block grant funds, you're free to go.
Yes, this is June Utt. I live at 673 King Avenue, and I would just like to ask that you all reconsider if you thought about changing the name of Florence Avenue Bridge to just keep it at Florence Avenue Bridge. I don't know if you're aware of all the history that goes with this, but at one time, this was the only way that people on King Avenue, James, and Elizabeth had of getting out of is to go up over the bridge. And the first original bridge was a wooden one. And
Right.
I cannot find a date anywhere on that. The books are always wanting to take you back to 1960, and that is not true. There was a wooden bridge that was there in the 40s, and it was really rickety, and they brought it down. And until they put Hopeman Parkway through and Broad Street, there was no way of getting off King Avenue. I mean, people don't realize that King Avenue was dead end street on both ends. And I just think that it's an icon, and it just hurts me that you want to change the name of it and not keep it as Florence Avenue Bridge. I would appreciate if y'all reconsider this request, and because Waynesboro has lost a lot of things. I know that you all are not responsible, but in my lifetime, I've lived here all my life. To build that post office and bank on Wayne Avenue, they took down a beautiful colonial house, high story, with long columns and everything. And then for the shopping center out there, they took down Rose Hill. I mean, is there no end to us taking down and redoing history? Because Florence Avenue Bridge is history.
That's right.
And I just appreciate y'all reconsidering that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. So we might duplicate those comments for the record into the general public comment period as well. But is there anyone else on the line, Jim?
No other caller. We have no other callers, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Well, thank you. Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. There's no action required this evening, but certainly appreciate the update in the presentation. So thank you. Item 7 is to consider adopting an ordinance revising the code of the city of Waynesboro, chapter 86, utilities, article 3, sewer and wastewater, sections 86-91 through 86-181, as it pertains to sanitary sewer industrial pretreatment program. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, in accordance with the Federal Clean Water Act and federal regulation, it is required that the owners and operators of public sewage treatment works must restrict certain types of harmful pollutants that may be discharged by commercial or industrial facilities from entering into the sanitary sewer collection system. And in order to do that, we develop these pre-treatment measures, and we comply through, or we require compliance through a local permit program. So the ordinance for you tonight makes revisions to that program. The program is meant to prevent the introduction of pollutants that might be detrimental to the operation of the sewage treatment plant. I know a number of you have had tours of the treatment plant and realize that it's a primarily biological treatment system. So there are chemicals that could be in substances that could be introduced that would be detrimental to the operation of the plant. There are other substances which simply wouldn't be treated in the facility and then would pass untreated through the plant and into the South River. And then finally, these kinds of programs help to improve the opportunity to reclaim and reuse municipal sludge. The proposed code revisions pertaining to industrial pretreatment programs have been drafted in accordance with new requirements that originate at the US EPA. We've worked with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and our local attorney to draft the current regulations, and they primarily include more stringent standards, and you would note revisions to wastewater terminology and definitions, clarification on what constitutes a significant industrial user and their requirements, modifications to the monitoring, sampling, and reporting requirements under the program, some clarification on reports that include information about compliance and best management practices, and then finally requirements to evaluate the need for sludge control plans for significant industrial users. The city currently has 4 permit holders under the program, and at least in our evaluation, these changes would not affect those users, but may affect some future user. There is a fee to become, to hold a permit, and the fee is developed by a metric that evaluates the substances that are being discharged relative to the overall general quality of wastewater. And then beyond that, I believe those are the only significant changes that are contemplated. So again, it is a requirement of the city's discharge permit that we have the program and that the program is in compliance with EPA and DEQ regulations. The revisions have been drafted accordingly in the ordinance attached for your consideration and potential introduction tonight.
Great, thank you, Jim. Are there any questions, Mr. Shaw? All right, is there a motion to adopt the ordinance?
I'll make the motion.
Great, thank you, Mr. Allen. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you, Bobby. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Item 8 is to receive a report from the Virginia Department of Transportation and ATCS consultants regarding the recently completed VDOT Strategically Targeted Affordable Railway Solutions STARS program study entitled the U.S. Route 250 Corridor Improvement Study from White Bridge Road in Augusta County to Hopeman Parkway in Waynesboro. And calling on Mr. Adam Campbell with VDOT to share the report with us.
Everyone hear me?
Yep.
We sure can, yes.
Good evening, members of council. My name is Adam Campbell. I am a transportation planner with the VDOT Stanton District. Joining me this evening is Nathan Umberger. He's transportation engineer with ATCS, who led the study effort. We are close to completing the study, and tonight we are excited to share with you the results and project recommendations from the last 9 months or so of the study team's efforts. Before I turn it over to Nathan, I just wanted to do a brief overview for you all of the STARS program. Nathan, if you go to the next, there we go. Okay, so the STARS program. STARS stands for Strategically Targeted Affordable Roadway Solutions. It's looking at targeted recommendations that really focus from a cost standpoint to really focus on safety and operational issues associated with corridors. It is an annual VDOT study program. Each year, new data sets related to crash history and operations become available to district staff, and district staff reviews those candidate corridors each year and works with localities to make applications for STARS funding. These studies are multimodal studies. They don't consider just vehicles. They look at all modes of transportation along the corridor, including pedestrian, bicyclists, transit. It is a collaborative study team approach. We have representatives from various sections of VDOT, both Stanton and Augusta, or Waynesboro and Augusta, Bright Transit, SAW MPO, and then the deliverables for these type of studies is an application-ready recommendations to be submitted through one of the state's various funding programs. We're currently working with city staff right now on a smart scale application to actually try to implement and get funding for the third recommendation that is Nathan's going to share with you all this evening. So with that, unless there's any questions on the STARS program in general, I will go ahead and turn it over to Nathan Umberger.
Any questions, Mr. Campbell? Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam, for the introduction, and thank you, Council, for opportunity to present to you this evening in this unique format. Certainly will be the first time I've had the opportunity to present in this, so I definitely appreciate your all's patience, but great that we're still able to bring this to you these days with this technology. So great introduction from Adam. Thanks for taking the lead on that. Kind of just a quick overview of our presentation this evening. We'll walk through some of our background steps, schedule, and whatnot, but we also want to emphasize, like Adam said, this has been a very comprehensive effort. We started really almost a year ago now, so it's been a long time, a lot of effort, and really a great team. Like you mentioned, we've had representatives from Augusta County, City of Waynesboro, Bright Organization, Central Shenandoah, PDC. So really a diverse group, as well as VDOT disciplines. And currently, we've developed a final report. Obviously, with the current virus situation, that's challenged us to do our final outreach, but we're still looking to do that, and we'll talk through that a little bit. The team there is listed on the right. Adam's been our lead for VDOT, and I've been proud to be involved in handle the consultant side of this. Just kind of a quick overview of our study area and what we've looked at. Our study really included parts of the county and city, starting all the way on the western end at Old White Bridge Church Road and extending into Hopeman Parkway. This corridor carries a pretty decent amount of traffic, 18 to 20,000 vehicles a day, depending on what section we're on. Relatively low as far as heavy vehicles, only about 1%, but we do cover 5 signalized intersections. And the study area is pretty consistent. We have a 5-lane section with a 2-way center turn lane and kind of minimal right turn lanes throughout. And so I'll point to the graphic that's on the right. You can see this corridor really contains a lot of what we call targeted safety needs or potential for safety improvement. The Lou DeWitt and Vedette intersections are considered critical intersections, as well as the roadway segments that span from Lou DeWitt and to all the way down to Vedette, as well as a portion of Lou DeWitt that approaches on Lou DeWitt itself. So a lot of things going on there, but gives you a little bit of background on the study area. Please stop at any time if there's something that's not clear or you have questions about anything. I'd be glad to answer those or take at the end as well. So just a little bit of a background, some of the existing conditions that we analyzed and looked at. There's currently not many pedestrian facilities. There's been a few sidewalk pieces that have been installed as part of developments, but generally, as a whole, the corridor doesn't have a lot of facilities that are designed for good, safe movement of pedestrians. And then there's a lot of access. There's over 60 access points in just over a mile. So very dense access. The graphic on the bottom shows some GIS mapping that we did that really shows just how dense those are. Some areas where we only have 75 to 95 feet in between access points, which is well below what would be considered kind of normally safe and standard under existing requirements. So, and what you can see in the top is a general look at the crashes within the corridor, and you can see that a majority of them involve angle or rear end type collisions that we normally see, when we have this dense access and signals like this. So this slide will show you kind of a high level map of the crash activity that occurred on the corridor. You can see that over 50 crashes a year are taking place here, so really almost one a week. So that's a very high level of crash activity, which of course was one of the first things that really jumped out during the study and the team really discussed and kind of delved into the details. And you can also see on this map that we highlighted, there's actually been a few fatal crashes, unfortunately, as well as multiple pedestrian crashes. So it just kind of highlights even more of the safety issues and needs on the corridor. What you can see here is an example. This is the level of detail that we go into when we're looking at the crash activity. You can see each of these bubbles represents different numbers of crashes during a specific year for a specific crash pattern. And so we really allow this data to tell us where the issues are concentrated and what's really happening. So this is what we use to really see where the patterns jump out and how we can try to come up with solutions to solve those issues. This one in particular is centered around the Vedette intersection, just because that is one that sees a very high level of crash activity. So I thought that would be a good example to show you how we work through these and how we collaborate together to look at those problems. This is some volume data from the corridor, which is actually a fairly fascinating chart. As a traffic engineer, I can tell you this is sort of unique. Most areas that we look at have very distinct AM and PM rush hours or peak hours. Certainly on the 250 corridor, what's kind of interesting is the traffic rises in the morning and then stays somewhat elevated throughout the day. So we don't really have high peak hours, but more consistent demand throughout the day. So there's really no 1 hour that we need to design to, or even a really directional show it. So that really comes into play in terms of how we would operate our signals and different recommendations there. So I thought this was interesting, and we went to a great effort to gather a lot of detailed data. So we wanted to make sure to share that. So as we work through our recommendations, one of our big focuses of the STARS program is to make sure we solicit good public information. We want to make sure we provide that outreach, get a lot of feedback on what we're looking at, so we don't come up with recommendations that will be widely opposed or the public just doesn't want to see. And so we put together a very thorough survey that went out back in January into February 3rd. This was advertised locally. Great help from the city staff. They were a key partner in making sure that this really went out by social media to get a lot of response. And so, unlike a lot of our normal in-person meetings where we don't always get the best turnout due to schedules and general people being busy these days, we were able to get almost 1,000 responses. So we were able to get 942 unique responses to our survey. And so those people were really, a lot of local folks who live and work in the Waynesboro area. Over 88% of the respondents live in the Fishersville, Waynesboro area, and 56% work in the area. So we have some interesting maps we could show where you see where those people commute to, but where they were willing to provide their zip code that they live and work. It kind of helps us just see the cross section of the public that we're getting. So we know we get a lot of local input, a lot of commuters, and so clearly safety was rated the #1. So in terms of the response, we asked for the public to rank, what their priorities for the corridor were, and far and away the #1 response we got was the safety improvement. So it really backed up what we saw in the data. And then what they also saw was, we wanted to still maintain operations. So we want it safe, but we would still like to make sure we're still getting there efficiently. Travel times aren't excessive. And then the priorities kind of went down from there. Kind of interestingly, public transit ranked #4, and then bicycle and pedestrian ranked 5 and 6, which were, above roadway aesthetics and property access. And as mentioned earlier, we're hoping to still do a final public meeting as soon as kind of conditions allow, where we're able to determine a format to continued outreach to the public on our preferred alternative and some of what we're sharing with you here this evening. So a little bit more detail from that survey that we found interesting is we asked for folks to tell us how often they use the corridor and then how they would like to use the corridor. So on the left, you can see that, again, we got a very good cross-section of local input. So you can see people are usually almost 2/3 of our respondents either use it multiple times a day or daily, or at minimum weekly. Very few are infrequent users. And then on the right, you can see that obviously we know it's a fairly vehicular-centric corridor, but interestingly, 13% and an additional 2 for transit. So almost 15% said that they would be willing to use bike, pedestrian, or transit options on the corridor if they were available. And then what we did is we presented a number of different alternatives for some different configurations. We looked at some different intersection configurations. We looked at some different lane configurations. So depending on how much desire there was for multimodal, there were options where we could do a road diet to look at a 2-lane section, or we could look at 4-lane divided. We also looked at a roundabout option, and then we, said, hey, are you happy with the way things are? And so far and away, this slide, and you'll see on the next slide as well, that the 4-lane divided concept was the highest ranked alternative among the public that responded to our input. And so just to give context, we're asked to rank these options on a scale of 1 to 5. So 2.5 is about neutral. If it's 2.5, as many people ranked it positively as negatively. Anything above 2.5 shows that it was very frequently ranked in the 4 to 5 star range by the public. So that kind of clearly shows that really a lot more people ranked this favorably than unfavorably. You can see on the second side, when we really looked at the cross sections about some opportunities for shared use paths or bike lanes or the existing corridor versus the 4-lane divided with a sidewalk, again, the 4-lane divided was very highly ranked and preferred by the public. And so with that, that gave us a lot of really good direction as to which way we wanted to go with these alternatives. And so we continued to develop that concept. Some key features being the addition of a raised median and then adding in the sidewalk on one side of the road, trying to be cost conscious. Both sides of the sidewalk drive a lot of cost when we're impacting right away in various things. Doing one side, we were able to very much kind of value engineer the location of the sidewalk to ensure that we're minimally impacting right-of-way takes, minimally impacting utilities, and really looking for ways that we can either be creative with the design or include different features that we can reduce costs. So we also, for the city portion, included a significant signal upgrade portion of the project where we would allow for upgrades of equipment, communications to improve coordination and allow for the city to get a lot more input from the signals that would allow for timing changes to be made as needed. So costs for those signal upgrades are included, including some of the older infrastructure to be fully upgraded. So that's a key part of this estimate as well. You can see in the upper right, in our benefits of this concept, it's projected that crash activity would be reduced by approximately 60%. And that's been a number that's been fairly thoroughly studied. A lot of traffic work really backs that up. And that's what the smart scale value is as well. So that's the safety benefit you can expect to receive in a smart scale score. And we realistically would expect to see that level of crash reduction with this project. Also, as noted, we include the sidewalk connectivity, which would be great for the business and residential uses to have that opportunity. During our field reviews, we saw a lot of pedestrians that were crossing the street, trying to use the corridor, several crossing in very random locations. So allowing that connectivity and then also improving the signals to allow some crossings should really improve the pedestrian safety as well. And then, as I mentioned, the signal operations would be improved. And another unique feature, there's a separate companion project from Bright that would allow for some additional transit improvements, bus stops, bus shelters, and also connecting these pedestrian improvements to those transit locations so that it would really encourage pedestrians to be able to access those areas and use that. And you can see in the graphics on the right, we do have a nice connectivity through this area that we've coordinated with them. It currently comes through the old Kmart parking lot, proceeds up 250. So there's 2 stops, both in front of Big Lots and also in front of the old Kroger, where the bus stops would be expanded and improved, and the pedestrian safety features would be added. And that's part of a separate project and not included in our estimate. So just pause for a minute. Any quick questions before I kind of move along a little bit? I want to make sure I'm not talking too much. So.
Any questions for Nathan? Okay, go right ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So moving along. So a few more just features of this. Our current estimate for all of this is about $5.2 million. So that's what we anticipate the smart scale ask to be. And you can see the breakdown there on the left. And again, I kind of mentioned a few of these assumptions earlier, as far as the signal upgrades. Those not aware, currently smart scale, the actual dollar figure may be higher as there would be escalation that'll be determined by the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment that does the scoring, but that'll be uniform across all applications and is not something that will really figure in. And then I also show the kind of typical sections. When we look at the different concepts, you'll see we tried to allow for some landscaping, some ability for some gateway features for this to be not just all concrete, but to also allow for a little bit of a placemaking. And then we have some areas where we have channelized and just regular islands for turn lanes. And you can kind of see the sidewalk on the side where generally we try to provide buffer as much as possible where we can offset the sidewalk. So it gives a little higher factor of safety for pedestrians using it. But where we needed to, due to utility locations or grade issues or other constraints, we would move that sidewalk in adjacent to the curb just for minimal sections when we had to. And so you'll see in the concepts that those are color coded in orange and blue. So you can kind of see how those work. And so we'll start, we've got 3 slides. Hopefully, I guess that's a good part of the online format. Hopefully these are zoomed in well enough. You can see these. We tried to break it down so they wouldn't get too small and you could actually view the improvements. We kind of start from west to east, and there's, again, 3 pages here where you can see the bus stop and sidewalk improvements that are included. We tried to, from an access standpoint, still make sure we were providing as much access as we reasonably could for businesses. We definitely had an eye to making sure there was either interparcel connection or connection to side streets so that as many properties as possible could still have access out to those main breaks. That way we're servicing as many properties with still full access, but without, spreading it up and down the corridor. So you can see here, starting at Community Drive is where we connect into the county portion, who has a separate companion application as well for their section for the western portion. But again, we include sidewalk, include the first bus stop location as we go through the intersection, continuing that through. And as we go through the city, the sidewalk is generally located on the south side of the corridor. That's just where we were able to avoid a lot of grade issues, some different drainage issues, again, minimizing right-of-way impacts as much as possible, because we want to make sure it works for the local community without having to take a lot of property or regrade a lot of entrances. So this is the western corridor, and then you can see we include full pedestrian access around all of the signals so that pedestrians will be able to get to and from. Moving on to the middle portion, you can see we included a partial access at Bookerdale, knowing that's somewhat of a cut through up and down from Lou DeWitt, considered it critical to still make sure that lefts could access that in. And that again would allow, for example, Westwood Village to have access to those different areas, and then over to Barksdale, so that those full accesses are still serving as many properties as possible where connections allow. And then you can see we have a full access of Summercrest, and you can see the green areas. Those are intended for possible landscaping, possible beautification, again, features to create a nice gateway into the city. And then our final slide here that goes all the way to Hopeman, you can see we continue that and again, try to keep landscaped areas. I'll point out the access is, something where generally the median is what's needed, but we took our best, guess with the great multidisciplinary team we had, but many of the access points, if one were considered a priority over another, there would be opportunity during design to maybe consider different priorities or if those needed shifted around. But the general idea being we were trying to bring it as closely into compliance with access management standards to improve safety as much as possible. So you can see here we continue. The only entrance that I will point out that is slightly impacted is this one that's on the corner of Carmen Avenue. We have two access points that are, immediately at the corner. We were not able to fit the sidewalk in due to grading issues and all if we allowed both of those to stay in. So this is one where I will point out we did have just one access that would potentially be closed. Otherwise, all actual driveway points remain open. But this one, we would not be able to get the sidewalk in and maintain both access points due to some various grade and site conditions. So it's anticipated that we would, you can see it's in blue, so we're already having the sidewalk kind of pushed along the roadway here as much as possible to avoid any right-of-way impacts. But this one is one where we would have just a minor business impact. But otherwise, we do not intend to close any access points. Any driveways that are there today would stay open and available as right-in, rights-outs if they're not a full access point. So I think with that, hopefully we've given you some good background, some good data of how we've kind of arrived at this and how the current configuration came together. Hopefully there's a good understanding, and certainly, again, we're still looking for input if there's anything that should change. We have still a window before the smart scale applications are due. So, while it's been screened in, there is opportunities to kind of tweak the application as needed, but we're pretty excited, just seeing the issues along this corridor, that this could see a real impact, some real positivity for, again, pedestrians, vehicular safety, as well as, again, hopefully creating a good sense of place within the city to allow this to be more of a place for business to thrive and people to get around. So I'll open it up for any questions. Or Adam, is there anything I missed? I'm sure there's always one or two things that were on my mind, or you probably caught that I maybe should have said, but I didn't. So please feel free to jump in if you see anything.
Great job, Nathan. I think you've covered everything.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you all. Are there any questions of members of council?
Did you have one, Mr. McCutcheon?
No, go ahead.
No. Well, I've got one. And again, just as people start to ask me questions, I want to be able to give them a good answer. You've still got the slide up on my view of the last segment down to Hopeman Parkway. Mm-hmm. If one is traveling east there on 250, there's no left turns at all. And so when people say they need to get into that neighborhood, the idea would be they would go on to Hopeman and then turn left onto Park, or what's the
Yes,
the
that's
recommendation to
correct.
get into that neighborhood. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And that, again, that's one where, we have nice network here on the north side, so there is connectivity so that we're still able to facilitate that. And I'm actually glad you asked the question. I'll point out a small feature here. This was something that I think had been looked about maybe previously is what we heard, but we did include, we know we have a heavy left turn volume onto Hopeman Parkway. Currently, the right lane kind of dead ends into a right lane must turn right. So kind of everyone has to shove over into the left lane as they approach and then kind of redistribute out if they're going through. So what we did is we aligned the lanes here so that the left lane would become the left turn onto Hopeman and the right lane would kind of shift just ever so subtly to become the through lane. So that way we hopefully can normalize traffic. I don't have it here in the slideshow, but we did see that in the traffic data, something like 80% of the traffic was using the left lane because most of them had a through or left destination. So we felt that would also help operations to kind of normalize the traffic. So just wanted to point out that feature in the slide as well. But sorry, I didn't want to get off topic, but you just reminded me of something else in this area that I wanted to point out there for you.
Anyone else? Questions?
But one more follow-up question, and I don't know if you can go back a slide.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Again, in anticipating, someone traveling eastbound, and then wants to get back to a business on the north side, are there going to be allowed U-turns at these cut-throughs, or how are they to access that area?
Yes, it would be fully anticipated that, U-turns would be allowed at these medians. Now, certainly, heavy vehicles would probably not be able to make those without significant widening. But, Adam and I were just discussing one of the advantages we have is the various ways you can connect to this corridor from I-64. So it wouldn't necessarily be unreasonable that trucks have alternative paths to use to get back to the interstate if that's their destination. But all vehicular traffic would still, we've got good room out here that, if you wanted to U-turn back to get to a specific business, you would be able to do so without much issue.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the questions. And I can flip back to any slides if there's anything anybody wanted to see again or discuss. That's easy to do.
Any additional questions? Anything, Bobby?
I do. I'm going through the packet that's in our packet. It's not in your slideshow, but in one of the slides here, 3.1.3, it's showing a roundabout in the area of the CVS and that going into Mike's subdivision. 250 and Lou DeWitt.
Mm-hmm. I think you might be talking about this one here. Is that?
Yeah, that one there.
Mm-hmm. So that was an option that we looked at, again, to improve the safety. You can see the public didn't give us as much positive feedback about that one. So that is not currently included in the funding application and the preferred alternative. We did cite in the report that, down the road, if that intersection continues to be a very busy one, and if there's, kind of safety concerns with the intersection, that it may be something you'd want to look at, at the appropriate time. But we kind of recognize that, it was not really the right time based on public input and the conditions there. So we think we can still make a very positive impact with this alternative and kind of go from there. So hopefully that answers your question about the status. It's not part of the funding application, but something that's just noted for
Any other questions? I would just add a very impressive study and appreciate the public participation. I think is pretty outstanding. I mean, nearly 1,000 people, and appreciate the context that the recommended solutions that have been sort of put out for consideration was it 60%, an anticipated reduction of crashes of 60%? Was that what I heard?
Yes, that's correct.
That's pretty amazing. So,
Mr.
Great.
Mayor, I'll just throw in also that I know these projects are very expensive and so forth, you know, looking at $5 million, but when you talk about 300 crashes over the space of the last few years, that even the value of property damage and hospital bills associated with that, and you obviously can't even put a price on people's lives, is in the tens of millions of dollars. So these kinds of projects that can improve safety at the level that a median can are worth that kind of money, especially if it's not our money.
Right. That's a great point. All right, any other questions? All right, hearing none, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Umberger, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if there's any other questions that come up from council members, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Great, thank you very much. Number 9 is to consider adopting an emergency ordinance forgiving penalties, fees, and interest on unpaid utility bills and suspending cutoffs for non-payment through July 31st, 2020. Mr. Hamp.
Yes, sir. Mayor Short, members of council, the provisions that council had previously adopted for giving penalties, fees, and interest and suspending cutoffs for our utility customers expire this month. I would note that the Virginia or the Commonwealth's State Corporation Commission have extended provisions for those public utilities for which they provide oversight and regulation through August 31st. It's staff's recommendation that the council extend our forgiveness and suspend cutoffs through July 31st, and staff would review our status and conditions as we approach that date, and if appropriate or desired by council to extend, we would consider doing so at that time. But for this evening, the ordinance extends through July 31st.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to adopt?
I'll make that motion.
Great, thank you, Mr. Allen. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. McCutcheon. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Number 10 is update and status of city reopening plans. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, this evening we just wanted to give you a brief overview of the staff's current efforts towards recovery, reopening Waynesboro, and what the council may expect and the citizens may expect in the coming months. I think we're also certainly looking for any input that the council may have about some of the decisions that are yet to be made. I think in an earlier similar presentation, we talked about the notion that as we recover, I don't know that necessarily means that we're returning to normal. I think that we're trying to establish a new normal, and we as other entities, other local governments, business, and so forth, as we continue to navigate a pandemic that looks as if it will be with us for some time, are trying to figure out ways that we can resume our necessary operations in a safe way, in a way that's consistent with the guidance that comes from public health professionals at the Virginia Department of Health and the guidance that comes from the governor's office. But I certainly think that folks are seeking ways to reduce risk that are sustainable over what may be some period of time yet. That as of today, there are 58,465 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the Commonwealth. So far, unfortunately, we've had more than 1,600 deaths in Virginia. However, I think good news is that we tend to be trending in the right direction relative to identification of new cases. Here in the Central Shenandoah Valley, we're kind of a mixed bag, that we still have one of only 3 jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, Bath County, that has no reported or identified cases. Here in Waynesboro, we're at 63 cases. 3 of those cases have resulted in hospitalization. However, the Harrisonburg and Rockingham areas have been hit particularly hard, both in terms of number of cases and hospitalizations and unfortunately deaths. And in those areas, the CDC considers an incident of more than 1,000 cases per 100,000 population as being exceptionally high, and certainly the Harrisonburg, Rockingham area meets that standard, unfortunately. I would note, and we've been advertising that we'll have another free COVID-19 testing center set up, a mobile testing center set up here this coming week on June the 25th between 2:30 and 6 o'clock in the afternoon at William Perry. It's a first come, first serve. We had a very successful voluntary COVID-19 test here about a month ago. And so we're doing it again in cooperation with the Virginia Department of Health and the National Guard assist. Just a quick timeline of where we've been. I think, especially in the early going, it was very difficult to keep up with sort of the shifting landscape of the pandemic, and that it's still, we find that it evolves rapidly, and it requires a bit of flexibility and agility on the part of organizations to respond. On March the 12th, the Governor Northam declared a state of emergency in the Commonwealth because of the pandemic, and the Waynesboro City Council followed suit shortly thereafter. By March 23rd, the Governor's Executive Order 53 closed non-essential businesses, closed K through 12 schools for 2 weeks, and banned gatherings of greater than 10 people. Within a very short period of time, by March 30th, Executive Order 55 issued a temporary stay-at-home order. About 6 weeks later, May 15th, phase 1 of the easing of restrictions, or what was referred to as safer at home, began. And then on June 5th, phase 2 of the Moving Virginia Forward Returning began with, again, an easing of restrictions, but still a safer at home approach to the pandemic. In phase 2, which we're currently in phase 2, again, the notion is that still folks are safer with social distancing, safer at home, especially vulnerable populations. But nonetheless, a variety of essential and non-essential businesses and religious institutions were able to reopen with safety restrictions. And most of those restrictions require appropriate social distancing, being able to keep folks at least 6 feet apart, continued teleworking for workers who can do so, a requirement for face coverings to be worn indoors in public. In many cases, businesses are required to operate at some percentage of their otherwise allowed occupancy in a building. And the governor moved the gatherings that were prohibited from 10 to now no gathering of greater than 50 people. The governor is contemplating what phase 3 might look like, and I think we're due to have some sort of an announcement at the end of this week. It doesn't mean that he will necessarily move us to phase 3 by the end of this week, but I think we're expecting to get some more information. We would expect that, say, phase 3 would likely still take a safer at home approach, but that businesses would be open with fewer restrictions. That is that occupancy limits would be either lifted or increased, but we would expect still requirements for social distancing, that face coverings are recommended indoors and in public, that we would continue to see teleworking promoted, and then that a gathering could be as great as 250 people. In both the current phase 2 and in phase 3, the governor provides best practice guidance for specific businesses and then general guidance for all businesses. We tend to look at the guidance for all businesses, and we have been developing our plans for reopening accordingly. As the governor considers moving from one phase to the next, as we understand it, the Commonwealth is tracking cases and hospitalizations in an effort to ensure that there is a continually reduced number of newly identified cases and that there is adequate hospital capacity to deal with folks who do suffer complications, that there's adequate testing capacity in the Commonwealth. And as you see more and more mobile testing being set up throughout our region and the Commonwealth generally. And then finally, that there are adequate supplies of personal protective equipment, especially in the healthcare industry and for first responders. So as the governor provides guidance, then we evaluate our own health and safety protocols in the workplace. And those protocols have become, fairly simple and generalized in concept, more difficult sometimes to implement, but that call for good hygiene, hand washing on a frequent basis, disinfection of commonly used surfaces or areas, things like counters and doorknobs and light switches. Then as well, this idea that we should continue to try to remain 6 feet apart from other folks, that we do have a travel policy in place for the city, and that we are, preparing employees by continually training and promoting the idea of safe practices. And then as well, as we move forward, we continue to monitor our own employees through health checks, maintaining the sort of leave policies that are required under some federal legislation that's been passed down, that we're keeping abreast of the number of local cases that are identified, and that we're keeping abreast of the guidance that's provided by the Virginia Department of Health, the CDC, and others. The things that we've been working on in order to prepare ourselves for reopening follow standard measures for protection. And this slide should be familiar from the work that we provided the council several weeks ago. But one is that physical distancing is still perhaps the most effective method of discouraging transmission. And so we will continue to have employees who telework. We have a number of jobs where teleworking is really quite natural, effective, and productive, and we will continue to have employees telework for some time in the future. That we're evaluating workspaces and trying to ensure that in those workspaces that we can achieve 6 feet of physical separation between employees, and that goes to looking at common areas and determining how many folks can enter into a conference room or a lunchroom, those kinds of common areas, and still maintain 6 feet of separation. And then implementing just basic things, that handshaking, hugging, all those kinds of things are out in the workplace now. We are currently doing temperature screening for employees that are reporting to work in the police department, the fire department, some of the public works crews. We also do health screening, a basic health questionnaire that employees respond to prior to reporting to work. We've developed, with the help of Virginia Department of Emergency Management, an app that can be put on people's mobile devices so that they can do the screening before they report to work. We're looking at various areas and trying to determine how we can control traffic, and we're putting down the sort of circulars that you see or tape that you see in grocery stores and other types of retail establishments to keep people 6 feet apart as they enter into lines, We've been installing sneeze guards in various areas. As of this week, we're starting the installation of touchless faucets and fixtures. We're preparing signage as folks enter buildings. They'll see signage that encourages wearing masks and taking other precautions. We're installing mask dispensers in buildings at the entrances to the public buildings. Some of the things that I think you could see as administrative controls. One is that there will be a greater restriction on the visitors and on the use of common spaces. I think that more commonly we're going to continue to use Zoom meetings, telephone, email, that sort of thing to communicate. And that in some areas, visitors would be allowed by appointment. Some of the programs that will restart in the near future are strictly by appointment. Again, communication and training for all employees and verifying that all employees have been through a standard training. We are stepping up our disinfection efforts in areas that would open in the future, the library and other public spaces. And we've revised various leave policies and even some schedules to either come into ensure that we're in compliance with the federal guidelines as they exist, or that we've arranged schedules to try to encourage that work crews are separated or fire crews are separated and those kinds of things. We will encourage the wearing of face coverings in the public areas and public facing jobs, or in situations where employees can't maintain adequate social distancing for a prolonged period, 10 minutes or more. We would encourage face coverings. We'd encourage the public to wear face coverings as they enter into our facilities. Gloves where appropriate, especially in disinfecting surfaces and that sort of thing. Certainly the use of PPE has its own protocol and has been common since the beginning of the outset of the pandemic for first responders. So I think some of the things that are being at least planned for, discussed. Hopefully you're aware that the Waynesboro Public Library has restarted curbside service. We're looking to some sort of a reopening, perhaps as early as August. When I've referred to it as a partial reopening, I think although the plans are still in development, what you would probably expect is that folks who enter the library would find that there aren't as many places to be able to sit. A lot of chairs and couches and those kinds of things would be removed. Folks would be encouraged to come in, select books and leave. Computers, a lot of the computers would be taken out of the library. And again, a lot of it is to try to prevent long-term congregation if large groups in the library. We would not necessarily resume a lot of the programming as early as August. But again, we're working with the librarian who is attuned to what his counterparts in Augusta County and Stanton are proposing, and then what both the CDC and larger library associations are developing for best practices in libraries. Parks and Rec, I would expect that we'll resume shelter rentals in July. Some of the youth league sports are starting to have some types of practices, especially baseball this time of year. We will reopen the public restrooms. And at this point, we're really contemplating fall programming and whether we'll be able to begin some of the fall programming. The Rosenwald Center is currently closed, would likely remain closed through July. There are some programs that take place there. Office on Youth has some parenting classes that take place there, but they basically, those individuals are greeted at the door, screened as they come into the building, but otherwise the building is remaining closed. I think as we look at reopening, whether it's the Gorsuch, the Yancey building, Economic Development Apartments building, First Street Municipal Public Works building, that we would expect first to have groups of employees that would come to those facilities to ensure that the workspaces have been arranged appropriately. In the Gorsuch building, the court systems have already resumed under the guidance of the Virginia Supreme Court and the individual judges of those courts. Most of the municipal operations are still closed there. One of our considerations, one, is that we can hit the checklist of all of the various items that I was mentioning previously. Have PPE been distributed to employees? Disinfection measures have been put in place, training is in place, workstations have been arranged appropriately. Another consideration that we have, as we look at it, that there is obviously a push in the Commonwealth and in other places to reopen for economic reasons, to get business back up and running. We don't share the same imperative necessarily. For us, the top priority is actually protecting the health of our employees so that we can continue to deliver essential public services. So in other words, making sure that police officers are on the street and firemen are available when that 911 call comes in, that we can deliver safe water, that we can continue to deliver sewer service and road services and that sort of thing are our priority. And then the support services that go along with that. In other words, we have to be able to provide payroll to those folks. We have to be able to collect taxes, things that keep the municipal government operating as essential services. So again, our top priority is to protect the employee group so that we wouldn't end up with an extraordinary absenteeism rate, that if we were to lose a fire crew to quarantine or lose a number of police officers, then that could be catastrophic for us. So, but we do recognize that there may be services that people will come to expect of us, and that may go through some period of adjustment. Obviously, we own the facilities that we do for the benefit of the public and at the basically payment of the taxpayer. So we're mindful of that, but I think that there may be some period of time where we transition. What are reasonable expectations in terms of delivery of service and access that you have to individuals in the municipal setting? Where economic development programs are concerned, I think the council obviously took action on a Renaissance grant program today to provide relief to small businesses through grants. But early in the pandemic, the EDA provided loans to small businesses. We've conducted business impact surveys. We're currently working through a program we've dubbed Wake Up Waynesboro, and I'd encourage you to go on to the Economic Development or Tourism website and look at that. Basically, we've developed a card that looks like a bingo card, and that as you visit or patronize various downtown businesses, you get to mark off one of your bingo squares, and then as you work through your bingo card, there will be a drawing, and folks will be eligible for gift cards and other merchandise from downtown businesses. The tourism department is developing what I would consider sort of a staycation program, and that the idea being that with the pandemic, there's still folks who are concerned about traveling. And so a lot of the tourism effort this coming summer, both locally and with our regional partners, will be to emphasize the many things that folks can do right here in Waynesboro or nearby in the Shenandoah Valley. And you may have seen even a flyer in the weekend paper that promoted a lot of attractions and activities that people can enjoy here in Waynesboro and Stanton and Augusta County. I think also the Economic Development Department continues to serve as a resource center. Certainly their website provides lots of information and links to resources that are available through state and federal programs. One of the items that I think is probably of particular concern to the council, doesn't need to be decided tonight, but is when the council might return to public meetings. And we're seeing different approaches from various jurisdictions in the region, up and down the valley, across the mountain. And some of it depends on the particular setting. In other words, that as we sit here today, even with allowing a gathering of up to 50 people, well, that's about half of the occupancy that can fit into the city council's chambers here in Waynesboro. So once you get council in, 5 people, once you get staff in, we generally have, somewhere around 5 or more staff members that attend council member meetings. Then you could only allow 40 members of the public in. However, we've been doing measurements in the council chambers, and at 40, you're right a little beyond the limit where people could adequately social distance. We think you could probably get a total of 35 people. That includes staff and council members in the council chambers. And so it begs the question as to whether it is we're best served to continue to have Zoom meetings where the public, any interested member of the public, can view the meeting and participate, versus going to live meetings where you may have to limit the number of people that come into the facility. Now, with phase 3, that may change. Certainly, if the limit of number of people who can gather goes to 250, that's not a problem. More the challenge would be if we need to continue to maintain social distance at 6 feet apart, and then how do you fit folks in, and at what point, and what does it look like to start to turn folks away from the door? Mr. Mayor, that concludes my presentation. We're certainly happy to answer any questions the council may have or entertain comments of the council.
Any questions or comments, Jim?
I had a comment or two. I've sort of used my pulpit before as the physician, to sort of remind folks of how we got to where we are and what we do know. And I think Jim has hit a lot of the high points that, there's growing evidence that social distancing does make a difference. And so, the wise person will continue to do that. There's lots of evidence that hand washing and hygiene matters, as he mentioned, cleaning surfaces, but for your personal space, washing your hands after being out and when you're coming and going does make a difference. And then finally, face masks. Again, there seems to be growing evidence that does make a difference. So that allows us to be in closer proximity with keeping our risks of transmission of the virus lower. So again, a wise person would do that when given the chance and the opportunity. I'll finish with an anecdote. We've all heard stories online about mass testing and other places where there are many asymptomatic individuals. I spoke to a patient of ours who had a caregiver who has now tested positive. This is an older woman who had someone coming into their home and helping out. And, here she is trying to do her best to remain isolated. Fortunately, she has been doing fine so far, but that's the scary part, that it may not be the person who's out shopping or out doing something. It's the person that then they expose at home that it may be more vulnerable. So, going forward, I think we keep in mind that we're all in this trying to respect each other and help each other. And if we all do our parts, we can keep that infection rate low here in Waynesboro. And certainly that would be the best for reopening Waynesboro quickest. But it does mean, continue to take precautions and be thoughtful of others. So that's my bully pulpit here today.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Any other questions or comments? Jim, one point I'd offer is so the Wake Up Waynesboro program, really cool, and I think it's an exciting one. I have heard from a couple of businesses that aren't in our downtown, and so I think just recognizing that I think the program was largely birthed, Addie, correct me if I'm wrong, but largely birthed out of the downtown destination downtown.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Organization, yeah, and that's where it's at. We're sort of they pitched the idea to us and said, hey, could you help a conglomerate of a bunch of downtown businesses facilitate this program? And we're assisting because a large contingency of the downtown businesses asked us to do so. And I would just, if you know, they do a great job, but I think we need to, because we're all downtown, just to be mindful of all of the small businesses throughout our whole community that really could help, would benefit from all participation. So, you know, Wake Up Waynesboro, all of Waynesboro would be great. So maybe a phase 2 of it or something like that. That would be wonderful.
Very good.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, great. We'll move on to number, thanks, Jim. Number 11 is to consider adopting an ordinance appropriating federal grant monies in the amount of $511,000 to various funds for goods and services rendered and eligible for allocation to the CARES Act. Mr. McCormick.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This ordinance serves to appropriate funds to the fiscal year 2020 budget to include costs incurred and expected to be incurred that are eligible to be funded by the CARES Act. These costs include things like preparing and implementing telework to comply with CDC guidelines, purchase of personal protective equipment such as masks and gloves to provide to employees, estimates of administrative time spent working on responses, time spent creating policies and procedures related to COVID-19, and a number of other miscellaneous charges for preparation and response to COVID-19. Any unspent portions of this appropriation will be reconciled during the year-end process and appropriated during fiscal year 2021.
Thank you. I appreciated the inclusion in the packet to Cameron of the details of how you all have broken this down. I thought it was very informative. Are there any questions, Mr. McCormick? Is there a motion to adopt the ordinance?
So move.
Great, thank you, Jeannie. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you, Anderson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Number 12 is to consider introducing and adopting an ordinance appropriating gifts and donations in the amount of $70,655 to the SVASC fund for goods and services rendered in the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020. Mr. Ham.
Yes, sir. As we approach the end of the fiscal year, we note that our revenue line item that accounts for miscellaneous gifts and donations will exceed significantly what we had planned to budget, or not what we had planned, but what we had actually budgeted for the fiscal year. And so this ordinance aligns our actual experience with our budget as we approach the conclusion of the fiscal year.
Great. Thank you. Very generous. Is there any questions, Mr. Ham? Is there a motion to adopt the ordinance?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Number 13 is to consider appointments and reappointments to various boards and commissions. Mr. Ham.
Yes, sir. Mayor Short and members of council, as we will work through these, and I would recommend that council pause at each one and consider them individually. So our first board and commission is the Planning Commission. Consider reappointing Mr. W. Tucker Lowry and Ms. Shannon Boyle, each to a 4-year term beginning September 1st, 2020 and ending August 31st, 2024. Each of these individuals currently serves and is eligible for and willing to accept a reappointment.
Thank you. Is there a motion to appoint the 2 members?
I'll make the motion.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, you're likely aware that Waynesboro participates in the regional economic development entity known as the Shenandoah Valley Partnership. Mr. Greg Hitchen represents the city on that board. He is eligible for reappointment to a 3-year term beginning July 1st, 2020, ending June 30th, 2023.
Great, thank you. Is there a motion to appoint Mr. Hitchin?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Due to relocation out of the area, Mr. Sean Kopp has resigned from the Blue Ridge Community College Board. Dr. John Downey recommends the appointment of Ms. Mary Louise Leak to fill this unexpired term. It's a 4-year term that will expire or that ends June 30th, 2023.
Thank you. Is there a motion to appoint Ms. Lee?
She's a very good choice. I make the motion.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Ms. Nicole Nicholson presently represents the city of Waynesboro on the Valley Community Services Board. She is eligible for reappointment to a 3-year term that would end June 30th, 2023.
Thank you. Is there a motion to appoint Ms. Nicholson?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Terry Short Jr., Mayor, is eligible for reappointment to the Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission for a 3-year term ending June 30th, 2023.
Thank you. Is there a motion to appoint yours truly?
I'll make
So
that motion.
moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Ms. McCutcheon?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And Cultural Commission.
The council is asked to consider appointing Ms. Glendine Williams to the Cultural Commission for an unexpired 4-year term ending August 31st, 2020. And I would say let's join that with a motion to then or also appoint for a 4-year term ending August 31, 2024.
Thank you. Is there a motion to appoint Ms. Williams?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Communication, correspondence, and calendar.
I don't have anything this evening, sir.
Okay. 15 is citizen comment period. Do we have anyone on the line this evening?
Mr. Mayor, we do not.
Okay. So with that, we'll move to number 16, which is to present a proclamation to Mrs. Jeannie McCutcheon recognizing her service on the Waynesboro City Council. There's the flowers I dropped off at her house earlier today. If you'll indulge me, I'll go and read the proclamation. Jeannie, you can go ahead and open up the envelope that I brought over for you. There you go. So proclamation of recognition by the Waynesboro City Council. Whereas in March 2020, Mrs. Jeannie McCutcheon was appointed to serve a remaining term on the Waynesboro City Council ending June 30th, 2020. And whereas Mrs. McCutcheon has always been mindful of the interests of the citizens of Waynesboro and has worked tirelessly to advise the interest of Ward A residents. And whereas Mrs. McCutcheon conducted herself throughout this service with exemplary fortitude, dignity, and grace. And whereas Mrs. McCutcheon's accomplishments, particularly helping develop and adopt a city budget under extraordinary circumstances, were made possible by her sustained determination, hard work, and exceptional intelligence. And whereas these traits speak well of Mrs. McCutcheon as an individual, they also bring honor to her family, her constituents, and the city of Waynesboro, and make her a distinguished member of our community. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of Waynesboro does hereby recognize the Honorable Jeannie McCutcheon for her outstanding achievements and the commendable manner in which she approached this monumental mission. In witness thereof, I hereunto set my name and cause the seal of the City of Waynesboro to be affixed this 22nd day of June, 2020. So with that, I will applaud Jeannie for her service.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for everything, Jeannie.
Okay.
All right. So,
I do have something to say. You know that, Mr. Short. No, you don't know that.
okay. Okay.
Allow me to have something to say at this moment before you ask for closing.
Sure, absolutely.
This is my personal feelings, plus a couple of my members on my Perka group feel the same way. I would like to say to each one of you as the city council person that I feel that you should keep Mr. Terry Short as the mayor of this city during this serious time. There are many issues that are out there that he's been very involved with you all. And I think it would be really detrimental to the cities. He's looking for growth, and we want things to have to grow this city. We need revenue to come into the city. I think to turn it upside down now will not be the thing to do. I am asking you all to consider. I know it's voted among you all. Personally, for me, I wish it was a vote by the city between the 5 of you. It's not that way, and I realize it. But I'm just saying, take a serious think about removing your mayor at this time. Thank you very much, and I have enjoyed it. It's been wonderful, and you will continue to see me, maybe not on Zoom, but you will in this face-to-face. Thank you again. Thank you for everything.
Thank you for your kindness, Jeannie. So with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned. Have a great night, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Good evening.
yourself. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again.